Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be discussing how you can potentially build a Raw Dragon team if you don't have, say, 2 Dark Callies or even the non-optimal team. So, a little bit of background information. Super Ultimate Raw Dragon has been released in Japan, and he's going to be the strongest non-Heart Cross leader in the game. This doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the best leader, but he's going to be on par with the top ones. So that is saying something, as the Heart Cross meta has been somewhat overpowering dominant for the last few months. Now, he has an optimal team like any other potential leader in the game, and ideally you want to try and adhere to that team as best as possible. However, not everyone is fortunate enough to own that many 6-star Godfest exclusives, and this article will hopefully shed some light on what you can do to help circumnavigate the problem. So, in essence, Raw Dragon is a rainbow leader who has a scaling component when you match up to 6 elements. So when you match 4 elements, you go 9 times, 56.25, and then 144 times with all 6 elements matched. Furthermore, all God-type cards have their health and recovery bolstered as well as their attack. So his actual final leader skill is 2.25 times health and recovery and 144 times attack for God types. And it's that God typing that is very important. You have to keep that in mind, because if you don't, you're only 64 times attack. No health, no recovery. So, the ideal team for Raw Dragon consists of 2 Dark Callies, Awoken Isis, and the Light Canna, who will be released at some point in North America. Now, this team is ideal because it's fully bind immune, you have 2 board changers, you have a built-in enhance, and Isis is a short 3-turn base for skill inheritance. In theory, everyone actually inherits an active skill of some sort, and that what active skill you choose to inherit is based on the situation, so on and so forth. So I can't really say like you have to have this, this, and this, because it all depends on what you're doing and what your partner has if you're playing co-op. So in essence, like, this team is well-rounded if you don't use skill inheritance, because you basically have a bit of everything you do need. Like, the damage enhance is important nowadays because things are much more difficult than when Raw Dragon was first released. Raw Dragon was 144 times a year ago. He's still 144 times now. But the dungeons and monsters and bosses have gotten harder, so you do need a damage enhance. And that's why Canna is there as well. She has 4 2-prongs, so she's a nice body. But let's examine what you do if you do not have the ideal team. Because unfortunately, most people don't have the ideal team, because from that team here, you need 3 6-star Godfest exclusives, a 300,000 monster point card, and then just a regular Pantheon. So that's a lot of investment and either a lot of luck or a lot of IAP, whatever you do. Like, it's just hard to assemble. Like, for myself personally, I don't have a single Dark Callie or Canna on both of my accounts. So either I'm unlucky or it's just really rare. So let's take a closer look at Isis and Canna. Now, Isis is really just used for the color coverage. There is no other reason why she's there, but she's the best water wood sub you can bring, partially because she is bind immune, and she has a 3-turn base cooldown, so you can easily inherit something on top of her. Otherwise, she's just, like I said, for color coverage, so just keep that in mind. And why Canna is there is because Canna is also bind immune. This helps keep the whole team bind immune, so you don't have to worry about those mechanics. But she has the 4 2-prongs, and her active is actually not that powerful. It's only 2 times damage for 1 turn with a single turn of haste. So you're inheriting something on top of her anyway, so you're actually only bringing Canna just for the 4 2-prongs and the nice body she has. So in actuality, Canna is really just a really nice luxury, and Isis is color coverage. So Isis and Canna are kind of the least important monsters on this team. If you can find water wood between 2 subs, you can easily replace Isis and Canna if you're not fortunate enough to roll them. And what you can use to replace them with is based on what you have in your monster box. So because Raw Dragon has the boost to God types, you want or should almost always use a God type monster. And don't care about the base active, because you are going to inherit something over top of it. So what you want to look for is something with obviously the God typing, with beneficial awakenings, and the color coverage as needed. And the active, like I said, is irrelevant because you're inheriting over it. So, for example, some strong God cards you could use are Dark Metatron, Awoken Izanagi, Raziel, Ariel, Reincarnate Parvati, and Venus. Then, basically, you basically just use what you have in your monster box. Like, look what you have available. What's your strongest weighted stat card, because you get the 2.25 times to all parameters, as well as what might have the most synergistic awakenings. Like 2 prongs are kind of the most important. If they're bind immune, that's even nicer. So just have to be creative and look at what you have at your disposal. Now, perhaps the meat of the article is Dark Cali. Now, on this team here, Dark Cali covers the dark and fire colors, as well as providing the full board change on a 7 or 8 turn cool. Either way, it's a short cooldown. And that's the only reason why she's there, because she has the color coverage. She's also binds immunes, what helps, but she has the board change. And you need that board change from time to time, because even if you can fully optimize the board and make 7, 8 combos every time, you may not necessarily get all 3 colors, or 3 colors of all 6 elements appearing. So you need to have these board refreshes, and that's why they are used on the team. And it's generally better to obviously have the actual monster itself than a base and inherit something on it, because the cooldown will be longer if you use it as a new base with the inherit. So, what can we do if you like you only have how does Dark Cali work exactly? So, people try and find alternatives for Dark Cali, and in the past, people used Ragnarok Dragon when he first came out, as well as Fat Chocobo, and those were somewhat effective for the old Raw Dragon, because the old Raw Dragon didn't boost health, he only boosted recovery and attack to god types, and when Raw Dragon was released, he was at the top of the power creep pyramid. Like, he was this high up. No, everyone else is, like, down here. Like, no one could compete. Like, it was a mistake on Gung Ho's part making something that much stronger. Like, you obviously should increase the power creep by increments. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. Not go from, like, here to, like, there. And that's what Raw Dragon was. He was up here. So, even if you had 1 or even 2 subs that weren't god types, it wasn't the end of the world, because you had 144 times attack when cards like Light Green Sucria, which I used at the time, had 36 times attack. Like, you just can't compete. So at the time, it was okay to use a non-god type. But the thing is, nowadays, it's a lot harder to get away with that, because 144 times is still strong, but it's nowhere near as overpowering as it was when Raw Dragon was first released, because we have other cards that can achieve those kinds of multipliers, or monocolored teams who can stack rows, 2 prongs, so on and so forth. So by using a non-god type card now, you're going to be hindering yourself a lot more, because they only provide 64 times attack and no health or no recovery. And that's kind of the main benefit of Raw Dragon right now, is those innate defensive abilities. So you really need to have almost a greater need to own Dark Cali, or at least use god type cards with those inherits. Now, if you are like most people and you have 0 to 1 Dark Calis, life is going to be harder. If you own 0, it's probably not a good idea to have a Raw Dragon team, unless you own multiple Sharius Roots or something similar that can be inherited, and use bases and put them on top of it. But then again, if you have 0 of them, it's just like, the cooldown's longer. Even if you use someone like Isis, who is a 3-turn, you're still adding 3 more turns. Like, it's just not as ideal. And if you own 0 Dark Calis, it's going to be really hard to run Raw Dragon effectively. However, if you own 1, you still at least have potential to be viable, because you can inherit a board changer. And in an ideal world, you want to have at least 2 on your team. Maybe 3. Depends on the dungeon, depends on your skill level and whatnot. But I want to just stress that you should not bring someone like Gaynut, Lynthia, who are farmable, or Chocobo, because, like I said, all 3 of them don't have the god typing, so they're only getting 64 times attack, and Gaynut, Lynthia produces Jam or Poison Orbs, so they're less ideal as well. Furthermore, I want to highlight how the leader skill works for Raw Dragon. Now, let's assume that these 3 are all hypermax and max level with 297s. So that makes Lynthia at about approximately 1,086 weighted stats, Chocobo at 950. Now, none of these will actually benefit from the actual leader skill multiplier for Raw Dragon, like at least in terms of the health and recovery and the attack for god types, and they will leave them at rather lackluster weighted stats, because they're still those 1,086, whereas the average god with plus 297 is probably 1,050. That's about approximately right. They're bolstered to about 2,363 because they're god typing. So they have so much more stats by comparison, and this gap only jumps and increases wider and wider if you start using, like, say, reincarnated gods who are coming out as well around the same time frame, who have about 1,300 weighted stats with 297, which jumps to obviously 800. Like, it's a huge difference in stats. So if you start using these non-god cards just because of the board changer, you're going to be hindering yourself further and further. Like, this is a big handicap you're imposing on yourself. And obviously, we don't live in an ideal world, so there has to be some exceptions, and Perhaps the only exception to like only using God-type cards is maybe Ragnarok Dragon, and maybe Sharius Roots to a lesser extent. And the only reason why Ragnarok Dragon can be at least considered is because he does have God and Dragon Killer Awakenings, so his attack value is higher, especially against those type of bosses. And it is at least something you can purchase. You can farm 300,000 monster points, you can purchase him. If you had one Dark Cali, you run Ragnarok Dragon alongside because you have no other inheritable board changer, it still could work. Like, he's the best option for a non-god type. Like, yes, he does have zero base art recovery, so it's going to hinder your ability to heal, but at least, like, it's not as detrimental as, say, Lynthia Gaina, because he actually has the proper board change, and those Killer Awakenings help make up for it. Furthermore, he is also bind immune, so he preserves that bind immunity across the whole team. Sharius Roots is basically just a weaker version of Ragnarok Dragon because they have only God Killer, and that's basically it. It's just not as powerful, and they're not bind immune as well. So, you can obviously, like I said, use those board changes, but just be aware of the handicap you're imposing on yourself, because Raw Dragon is not as overwhelmingly powerful. He's very powerful still, but he's not going to be like game-breaking like he was before. So if you don't own Raw Dragon right now, and you're thinking of purchasing him and you only have one Dark Cali and no other way to inherit a board changer, I would probably suggest you should not, unless like you really, really like the play style. Like, it's just going to be hard to compete because you have possibly other high-end Heartcross teams who can fulfill similar dungeon requirements that says they can clear high-end content. But like I said, it's all up to your own personal preference. If you love the playstyle and just want to do it, go for it. And I want to highlight Keji, and how Keji is also possibly another substitute for a Dark Cali. Because Keji is also a God-type monster, and he has a board refresh. Now, a board refresh is different than a board changer, because a refresh has him erase all the orbs on the board and then skyfall a clump of 30 new orbs down. And from that clump skyfall, that can be influenced by either skyfall debuffs or buffs, whatever is occurring. So you could have excessive amounts of a certain color. They can be locked as they fall. You could have poison orbs as they fall, if those are applicable. And it's random because it's a giant skyfall blob. It's not generating 30 new orbs. It's 30 brand new orbs falling down into place. And that randomness can be your downfall, because it doesn't guarantee you at least 3 colors of each element. So you could use Keji's active, and you could have a board you only can get 56 times damage off of. Like, this is dangerous. Like, you're going to be like, oh my god, I really need to kill this floor, but now I don't have enough damage. Like, this is not a good scenario because it's random, the distribution, and it is risky. You can use them, obviously, the base and inherit something on top of it. That will definitely work. But the point being is, like, it's risky to use his active by itself. His main value is to remove those locked orbs, and which we saw on, say, the plus 297 Zeus dungeon, where you need to get rid of those 20 locked orbs. His style of active is perfect for that. So that's the main issue, like, with Keji. Like, it is viable, but you're taking a risk every time he uses active, so just keep that in mind. So, what bases to use, like, for monsters? Because, like I said, you may not have the ideal team, and you should at least try and find a way to get 2 board changers, so base inherit, or 2 Dark Calis, so on and so forth. But what you actually want to use is based off of your monster box, what you have available, and what will have potentially the most synergy with your team. Because you should always prioritize god types, who ideally have high base stats, and they could ideally have low base cooldowns. If it's longer, you can still get around it. You just inherit something and just use it later on, but shorter is better. And possibly 2-prong attack awakenings. And 2-prong attack awakenings are valuable because that's the only type of damage you can really benefit from as a raw dragon. Maybe orb enhances to a smaller degree, but 2-prong is the way to go. So those would help you out. And there's no real hard, fast rule of what you should bring. Just use what's the best card in your monster box that is available. Like I said, from the examples listed above here, you have, these are just a few, and like Rosio and Ariel are actually not bad because they have triple 2-prongs and low base cooldowns as well as bind immunity, so there is value in bringing those types of cards. Also look forward to the reincarnated evolutions that are coming out in the future. So, in conclusion, Raw Dragon ideally wants those 2 Dark Calis and of course the Isis and Canna. However, most players don't actually have that perfect team ready-made to go, so you have to be creative. And you have to try and find ways to overcome the hurdles. Like, He doesn't require skill bind resist only subs now because he has them on his own awakenings, so he's a lot safer to run solo mode. But you still want to at least bring 2 board changers because you still face the same orb troll chance or the inability to combo, whatever may happen. Like, you do want to have board changers available. And like I said, you want to try and pick god-type cards with synergistic awakenings, high stats, 2 prongs, so on and so forth. So the thing is, like, you can still run non-god cards on Raw Dragon, but the problem is you are going to flounder moving forward because you're giving yourself a handicap on a leader who is strong, but why would you want to give yourself a bigger handicap? It's like, say you have a Miru team and then you put a dark sub on it for no reason whatsoever. Like, it makes no sense, is the point. That's the point I'm just trying to get at. That's kind of the equivalent of what you're trying to do if you use a non-god card as your team. So hopefully this video is informative. This article will be linked in the description below. I'll also link my Raw Dragon analysis as well, so take a look at those if you haven't already. Let me know what you think and how you plan to use your Raw Dragon in the comments below. Have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling!